So just a few days after the shocking raid at Hyundai and LG's joint battery plant in Georgia, we're now seeing the second chapter of this unfolding story. The immediate question, what happens to the 300 Koreans who were detained? That finally has an answer, it seems. Most will be released under what the US officials call voluntary departure. And that phrase may sound bureaucratic, but instead of being dragged through months of immigration court hearings or facing formal deportation orders, the detainees are being asked to sign papers agreeing to leave the US on their own. So that's what it's supposed to mean. And once they do, they'll be put on a charter flight back to Korea, possibly as soon as this week. Now, on paper, voluntary departure looks like the least damaging option. It allows the workers to avoid an official deportation mark on their record, and it clears the way for a quicker release. But immigration lawyers in Korea point out the fine print. That is, by signing, detainees are also acknowledging that they were in violation of their visa terms, and that could raise the question, will they be barred from coming back to the US for years, even if their companies need them for future projects? And that uncertainty is exactly what Korea's foreign ministry is now scrambling to resolve. A special task force of consular officials has been negotiating with the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, while Foreign Minister Cho Hyun has flown to Washington to push for guarantees. And Korea's argument is that these workers weren't trying to settle illegally in America. They were dispatched as part of major bilateral investment projects. And so punishing them with re-entry bans would only hurt the very cooperation that the US has been promoting. At the same time, the optics of this case remain highly charged. Like images of these skilled Korean engineers in handcuffs and chains have already gone viral, which fueled anger back home. And for many people, the idea that Korea pours billions into building US factories only to see its own people treated as criminals, it feels not just humiliating, but fundamentally unfair. And that brings us to the next layer of the story. How this raid is reverberating far beyond one plant in Georgia and potentially reshaping the way like Samsung, SK, and the entire K battery industry think about doing business in America. So the Georgia raid may have started with Hyundai and LG, but the shockwaves are already hitting the entire Korean tech industry. Samsung and SK Hynix, which are two giants with their own multi-billion-dollar projects in Texas and Indiana, are suddenly on edge. Because until now, business trips to the US for engineers and technicians were routine. Like workers often flew in on short-term business visas or through the ESTA waiver, ESTA, and they did a training or installation work and returned home safely. But after what happened in Georgia, that practice no longer looks safe. For Samsung, the timing is especially delicate. Why? Because its 17 billion US dollars semiconductor foundry in Taylor, Texas is nearing completion, with plans to produce Tesla's next generation AI chips. And any disruption in staffing could ripple straight into the global chip supply chain. SK Hynix, meanwhile, is preparing to build a major advanced packaging plant in Indiana. It hasn't even broken ground yet, but executives are already worried. Like, how can they send the right people to set up such a complex facility if U.S. immigration treats skilled Korean staff as unauthorized workers? And here's a bigger issue. Many of those detained in Georgia weren't even core Hyundai or LG employees. They were subcontractors and workers from smaller partner firms. The kinds of companies that don't always have the resources or legal expertise to navigate America's super complex visa system. And that detail matters because it shows how fragile the system is. like a few missteps by smaller subcontractors, can trigger a political and diplomatic crisis that could engulf the entire industry. And this is why industry voices are calling once again for a structural solution. Korean companies have been lobbying for years for a special E4 visa category, which is a dedicated track that would allow skilled Korean engineers and technicians to work legally on US projects. And the idea has been stuck in Congress for over a decade, blocked by American lawmakers who are worried about protecting local jobs. And now, after this raid, the calls are growing louder. Without a tailored visa system, these flashpoints will only potentially repeat, each one more damaging than the last. So while the detained workers prepare to board, charter flights back home, Samsung, SK, and every other Korean firm with U.S. projects are recalculating their risk. Because the message from Washington is clear. What used to be tolerated is now a red line. And unless there's a breakthrough on visas, Korea's flagship industries may find that America, which is their biggest partner and market, has suddenly become their biggest uncertainty. Now, in the US, Donald Trump has wasted no time framing the Georgia raid as proof of his administration's tough stance on immigration. He posted online that foreign companies are welcome to invest in America, but only if they respect U.S. laws and train American workers. And on the surface, that sounds like standard rhetoric. But between the lines, it's a warning shot. Like foreign investors like Hyundai, LG, Samsung, and SK can expect much stricter scrutiny, not just on visas, but on whether they're actually delivering jobs to U.S. citizens. Local politicians are already amplifying that message, like Tory Branham, a congressional candidate in Georgia, as I discussed in my previous video, openly bragged about tipping off ICE to the Hyundai LG project. And to her and her base, her supporters, it's simple. If these companies are receiving billions in tax breaks, they should be hiring locals, not flying in Koreans on short-term visas. And that narrative plays well in today's climate, and it gives U.S. authorities little incentive to back down. Back in Seoul, back in Korea, the optics are disastrous. Like I said, images of Korean engineers in handcuffs and chains have spread across social media, fueling anger that Korean talent is being humiliated abroad. And you don't have to take my word for it. Just look at the comments pouring in on Korean social media and YouTube news videos. Like thousands of people are saying the same thing. Don't hand over our technology. Once the US learns it, they'll throw us away. Others call the treatment a national humiliation, pointing to the chains on Korean engineers as the ultimate insult. There's also a growing, voice demanding that Korea pull out of US projects altogether. Comments like, is Korea a pushover? Or cancel all US plans and build them at home have tens of thousands of likes. And some people even go further, calling for reciprocal action. Like, for example, deporting Americans in Korea who are working without proper visa just to prove a point. Well, yeah, so overall, people are getting emotional. And what's striking is the depth of emotion. Yeah, people aren't debating visa categories or legal fine prints. They're reacting to the image of Korea's most skilled workers being shackled on foreign soil. And for many people, this isn't just about immigration law. It's about pride, dignity, and whether the US-Korea alliance is really a partnership at all, or simply exploitation in disguise. And that public anger could matter, because when ordinary citizens start framing technology as something too precious to share and start demanding withdrawal from overseas projects, it puts real pressure on Korean government and on the companies themselves. And then there's the investor angle. Again, Hyundai's expansion plans in the US, from a $43 billion EV project to future steel and robotic plants, now looks shakier. And if every project risks immigration raids, visa delays, or political, grandstanding, Can Korean firms confidently keep betting on America? That's the question. Like global investors are watching closely. And Hyundai and LG stock price have already seen volatility, and analysts warn that any further delays or diplomatic friction could erode the very trust these companies have worked so hard to build in U.S. markets. So, yeah. Again, this isn't just about immigration enforcement anymore. It's about whether the U.S.-Korea partnership, which is long marketed as a win-win in the EV and tech race, at least, can withstand the weight of domestic politics on both sides. So, yeah, I think this Georgia raid has forced everyone to confront an uncomfortable reality. The U.S. wants foreign investment, but it also wants tight control over immigration. And right now, those two goals are colliding. For Korean companies, the stakes couldn't be higher. Billions of dollars are already sunk into U.S. plants. Production timelines are tied to electric vehicle subsidies and climate policy deadlines. But without a reliable visa pathway for skilled Korean staff to enter the U.S. legally, every new project risks running into the same wall we just saw in Georgia. And this is why the discussion is shifting toward structural fixes. Business leaders are once again urging Washington to create a special professional visa track, often referred to as an E4 visa, specifically for Korean technical staff. It's not a new idea. Korea pushed for it during the free trade agreement talks more than a decade ago, but the U.S. shelved it over fears of job loss. Now, after this crisis, momentum may be building again. We'll have to see. At the same time, there's pressure on Seoul, Korean government, to rethink its strategy. Should Korean firms keep pouring investments into U.S. if their engineers risk being detained and deported, or should they diversify, placing more factories in Europe, Southeast Asia, or even, keeping more production at home? So the political shockwaves from this case could accelerate that recalibration. And for Washington, there's also a calculation. If immigration enforcement keeps clashing with high-profile foreign projects, America could risk scaring off the very allies that it needs in its supply chain competition with China, for example. The Biden administration once pitched Korean EV and battery plants as proof of strong U.S.-Korea economic ties. And now, under Trump, those same projects are being cast as potential liabilities. So which story will prevail? We'll have to see. And then there's the human dimension. Hundreds of Korean engineers and workers will soon board planes back home, likely under the voluntary departure process. Whether or not they face re-entry bans remains unclear. But the humiliation of being chained and marched off a U.S. worksite won't fade quickly, I don't think. Because that memory will hang over every negotiation, every contract, every new announcement of jobs created in America. So the big question is, does this incident mark a one-off clash, or is it the start of a deeper realignment in how U.S.-Korea business cooperation works? If it's the latter, companies and governments and workers alike will need a new playbook. And I know many of you left some really interesting comments under the last video. So here's just a few examples of what people have been saying. Someone wrote, "As an American, I'm embarrassed." And some said the government needs to fix the visa situation. And MAGA needs to sit down. They're killing our economy. Another person said the workers were let down by their companies. Hyundai and LG knew the risk, but still took the cheapest route. And now the government and taxpayers are cleaning up the mess. Others turned their focus on U.S. politics. If the administration can't provide visas or skilled local workers, foreign investment will dry up. Parroting engineers in chains was insulting, not just to Korea, but to all allies. And some of you worried about the long-term fallout too, saying, if Hyundai could have found enough qualified workers in Georgia, they would have. Now locals lose tax revenue, small businesses lose customers, and the next project might go to Mexico or Canada instead. There were also comments that went deeper into U.S. politics, saying this was a political football that the Trump administration was deliberately testing Korea's new president, Lee Jae-myung, and using the incident to score points at home. Someone else described it as military-style optics designed to make headlines rather than quietly solving a visa issue. So as you can see, reactions are all over the spectrum. Some blaming U.S. enforcement, some blaming Korea corporations, and some worried about the workers, and others thinking about the bigger picture of trade, politics, and investment. So keep the discussion going, and yeah, keep your comments coming, but let's also try to keep things classy when we talk about sensitive topics like this. Okay? I'll see you later in our next video. Peace and love. Bye-bye.